Hey, good afternoon everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Beautiful day here today, and today we're going to follow up on that REDODO 200 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery which has failed. That was the last video that we put out here, and we got tons of great comments from all of you about the possible problems that might be going on with that. And in the meantime, REDODO has reached out to me and recommended that I try a test for them to determine whether this battery has truly failed. So just to bring everybody up to speed, the other morning I woke up and this battery was not working, not accepting a charge, not being able to be discharged. And I had that battery tied into this little system, and it had been working absolutely perfectly for over a week, zero problems. And when it failed, I just slid this Timeusb in there, and it has been working perfectly for several days since I tied that in there. Zero issues whatsoever. And looking at the Victron app for the 7515 solar charge controller, you can see everything for the past week. It was absolutely working perfectly, getting up to float charge every day. And then it was on this day, several days ago, and you can see that minimum battery voltage was reading 0.09 volts. That's what caught my attention when I saw it that morning. And yet the charge controller showed this thing was up in float, as you can see there. So the charge controller was reading it. It did spike for a moment at 14.53, but every other day it went up to what I had it charged up. The parameter set for was 14.2. And I know a lot of you have said it should never be anything over 14. And I actually have gone and changed most of my systems to that. But on this one, it was running fine at what it was supposed to be doing until that morning there. So, and then this is the log after I slid the Timeusb in there, and everything's working absolutely fine. You can see that I did drop the values after this day down to 14, and that's exactly what it takes it up to. No problems whatsoever. And today on this last bar, it's still charging. So it's well on its way to getting a full charge today. But this is the day in question. 0.09 volts. The maximum battery voltage showed a 14.53. Showed 60 watt hours had gone into that. But the charge controller was reading this as completely full, but the battery was stuck and has not been able to resort to any charging or discharging capabilities. And I got just tons and tons of comments of you guys trying to help me figure out what was going on. I don't know. I still don't know. So REDODO did take notice of our conversations that were happening around this battery failure, and this is their response. And I will just read it to you, and you can read along if you want, but it's short and sweet, and it says, "Hi Bob, I just saw today that there is something wrong with your REDODO 12 volt 200 amp hour plus battery. I consulted our technical engineer and guess that the reason why this is so is the result of the BMS has been working. The BMS is in low battery protection state. Charging can be activated, but just a few seconds of charging cannot change the low battery status. So please use the charger to charge for more than 3 hours and then look at the battery status so you can try to change for 3 hours or charge for 3 hours and then see the battery status. If it still can't be solved after 3 hours of charging, please feel free to let me know, and we will come back to analyze the battery status. And our technical engineers recommend setting the float voltage of MPPT to 14 volts. 13.5 volts will be slightly lower. Besides, our technical engineers recommend adding circuit breakers and fuses to the charging and discharging circuit of the battery pack so that when the battery is not in use, the battery is not allowed to have the possibility of back charging MPPT and solar panels, and it is safer to overhaul the battery. The following is a simple circuit diagram. Hope it is useful to you. And you can see right there they included a simple diagram for what they were talking about. So that was their response. So what I've done is I have slid that battery into a separate system that I have, and I had this battery which I tore down in an earlier review. It's been working absolutely perfectly, no problems whatsoever on this system. I have been trying everything I could think of to wake that battery up, as you guys have watched in the previous video. And now I have it tied up into this system here. And this has everything you would need. We've got the breakers, we've got the fuses, and we've got an inverter that we've been using on it. This system has been working fantastically with a lot of different batteries. So now we have slid this one into place. And before we fire this system up, I do have the battery tied up now, but I've got the system completely disconnected. I've flipped all the breakers. The charge controller is not on, and the solar panels are off as well. But let's just get a voltage read. And right there, the same voltage that we were reading the other day, 8.55, that has not changed, other than just maybe, you know, in the slightest bit, but it has not changed. 8.55 volts on this battery. So now we're going to fire it up as they suggest and see what happens. So I'm going to come here, flip my breaker on, flip my breaker on here. Now I should have battery power going to the charge controller. Nothing. Let's flip the solar panels on. That activated the charge controller. And look what happens. Immediately, 13.95 volts, 9.4. And now that the charge controller is awake, I should be able to see it on my app page. Right here. I've got it named Coffee Station because for so long, as you guys know, I was just making coffee here testing. And here we go. 0 watts coming in off those panels. It's letting 0 watts. The charge controller is reading that at 14 volts, which is what I have this set for the absorption phase now. I went back and changed a lot of my systems to 14. As per many of your recommendations, I had been using 14.2 or 14.1 with no problems, but I've gone ahead and switched them back to 14, and here we go. 0 watts being allowed in on that from the solar array. I've got 300 watts of solar out there. 0. Reading the battery voltage, 14.0. On the multimeter, 13.95. But with all of that going, will the inverter kick on? Okay, the inverter did kick on. Now it's letting in 5 watts, still holding it up there at that 14. So they wanted me to, REDODO suggested that I just tie this up like this and let it sit for 3 hours. So there we are, 14 volts. Everything looks good. It's a 75 volt charge controller. We're well, just looking great there. And it's just letting in what the charge controller thinks it needs to to hold it at 14 volts. The multimeter pretty much reading the same thing. There we go. So let's see if we can actually put a discharge on that inverter. And we can see the charge controller with the yellow light on indicates it's in the absorption mode. So the charge controller, once again, now this is the exact same size charge controller that was on that other system. And it did the same thing. It reads the battery is completely full in its absorption phase, allowing 6 watts to hold it right at 14 volts, which is what we have this charge controller set for. Multimeter 13.94, so pretty close. We've got just a lamp here. Let's just dip our toes in the water a little bit and see if we can discharge anything. Light came on, the inverter is working, which on the other system, it would not let the inverter turn on. And there it is. It's kind of just bumped up the watts off the solar panel to accommodate the 7 or 8 watts that this light bulb draws. And it's still holding it at 14, which is exactly what you'd want it to do. So this looks pretty normal. So, haven't got any answers yet, but yeah, everything looks okay. Charge controller reading it just fine. Lights on, drawing at 7 or 8 watts, holding it right at 14 volts. Okay, so let's turn the light off. That should drop down immediately, which it does. It drops down to, you know, now it only takes 6 watts off those panels to hold it at what it believes is a full charge. And this is the other thing that is very puzzling to me, because the other morning when this battery had that low voltage disconnect, there is no way possible it could have been up to 14 volts. No way, as there's no way right now that this battery could be at 14 volts. There's no way. Because I'd taken several hundred watt hours off of it overnight. The panels had just barely caught any sun, and with 1 watt coming in, it was reading it as completely full. So I know that that's not the way it truly is. Okay, so now, still scratching my head. So let's backtrack on everything. Let's shut these panels off. I'll disconnect the breakers. And there we go, right back to 8.57 volts off the multimeter, which is tied into the battery. And of course, we've lost our app connectivity to the Bluetooth charge controller because it has no power going to it now. So we can't see what it wants to read. But everything's shut off, 0 power coming from this system now. Nothing off the solar. There. And let's see if that inverter is still on. The inverter is off. The inverter went off as well. So let me turn that back off and then try and turn it back on that 8 volt reading. Nothing. The inverter will not come on. That's what I experienced with that other inverter. It would not go on. Low voltage disconnect, no power. Nothing there either. Okay, so, and that's what it does. So now, do I just turn this on like REDODO wants and let it run for 3 hours and see if that changes? Flip these back on. Last, I turn on the panels. Fired up the charge controller. The inverter went back on. And Get back to here. Six watts coming in off those panels, holding it 14 volts. A little bit higher there for a moment, but basically 14 volts everywhere. Huh. Okay. Inverter works again. So that's with 17 watts of solar coming in. As soon as I throw the switch on the solar panels, everything works on this system. Like I said, I've had zero problems with this particular system. So I guess what I'll do is what they suggest, and I'll come back in 3 hours and see what happens. And I'm going to start the timer right now. I'll keep a close eye on this. Yeah. So the minute I disconnect those solar panels, it goes right back down to 8 volts. Okay, we'll see. I'll be back in 3 hours. Just a quick look at 1 hour in. It's still just allowing 1 watt to come in to hold it at 14 volts. Still showing it in the absorption phase as it should if it was acting correctly. So we will be back. Okay, we're back. It's been over 3 hours now. It did click into float. The entire time it was going through the absorption phase, it never did draw more than 1 watt. I never did try to draw anything else off of it. And I did happen to watch it when it clicked over to float, and it went immediately from 14 volts right there to 13.5, which 13.5 is the float setting, but it did that within 1 second. So there's no way that that battery went from 14 volts to 13.5 in 1 second. You know, typically when it cuts the panels off, it will turn it off to 0 watts coming in, and then it takes it, you know, a while to settle down from 14 volts to the 13.5 float. This did not. The minute it went over into float from absorption, it went immediately to 13.5. So something's definitely wrong with this battery. Yeah, so there it is. And I will go ahead and turn everything back on and see what has happened after 3 hours, but this battery is not acting correctly. And there you can see the charge controller has gone into the green light, so it actually believes that battery is in float. I do not. And let's come back over here. The inverter does turn on. It's letting, you know, a few watts to come in and hold it at 13.5. We'll try the light one more time. Yeah, it works. Okay. Now, the final test. Let's disconnect the solar panels. Boom. See what happens. 0 coming in off of solar. Everything resorts to 0. It's not connected. I'll flip these breakers real quick. 1, 2. And let's turn this back on. 8.5 volts. So there it is. We left it charging on the charger as per REDODO's recommendations. Nothing has changed whatsoever. 8.5 volts. That battery, I'm calling it dead and malfunctioning. Yeah, for sure. And I have now disconnected the REDODO. I put this EnjoyBot back in place with nothing turned back on. All breakers disconnected, charge controller still off, solar panels off. put the multimeter on this. It has been sitting there at rest for the past few hours while we were running this test on the REDODO. And there you go, 13.15 at rest, just what it should be. So yeah, something's wrong with this one, no doubt. And a quick glance after I turned everything back on, 30 some watts. Those panels are a little bit in shade now this late in the day, but this is the EnjoyBot now trying to charge up to its full charge for the day. It won't make it because we've ran this other experiment on the REDODO, but everything's working absolutely fine, just like it should. It's not, you know, reading anything incorrectly. There's something wrong with the REDODO. We'll turn the inverter on just to show you that that's all working fine too. Everything works fine on the EnjoyBot now that we've switched it over. So this one won't budge off of 8.5 volts. The charge controller, like it did on the other system, wants to read it as full, but that is not a full battery, not even close. I have tried other things as recommended. I tried to use a wall charger, a 20 amp wall charger for lithium iron phosphate. The charger would not even turn on, so this would not even accept a charge in that manner. I just did this experiment per REDODO's request. And I know you're watching REDODO, so I'll be anxious to hear what you say about this, but this battery, I'm calling it malfunctioning and not usable. So I got lots of great responses in the last video. I expect I'm going to get many, many more great responses. I just wanted to read a couple of them. Jason said, I think your BMS is fine. It shows nominal voltage when connected in parallel with a second battery, which we also did do in the last video. And it's not asleep where it would show basically 0 voltage. I think you've got a bad cell or cell pairing inside the REDODO. Hopefully they will see the testing that we've done, concede something is definitely broken inside, and honor a warranty without any issues. And from Sylvan, we got no, the correct voltage it shows when in parallel is just the voltage of the second battery, which we also tried tying up a second battery to that REDODO, and it just showed exactly like he says, to show basically 0. It would have to suck the other battery down to basically 0, which would be hundreds of amps through the wires into wear. So yeah, I appreciate all your guys' comments. There's so many I would just love to read. I tried doing a lot of what was suggested. I've never been able to get this battery to budge, but I appreciate all of your input, and I do appreciate REDODO reaching out. I fully expect I will hear from them on this, and I hope they will be able to conclude what I think we're all in agreement with, that this battery is definitely not working. And I'll just show you, I mean, REDODO, I've never had a problem. I have a couple other batteries. This one here is their regular 12.8 volt, 200 amp hour lithium iron phosphate. It's been running a refrigerator 24/7 for just week after week after week. 0 problems whatsoever. I can follow its charging and discharging progress on the app. Never had a single problem. And like I've always said to you guys, if I ever run across a problem in any of these things I review, you'll be the first to know. This is the first time I've ever had a battery failure. First time in all the batteries that have been sent out here for review. First one that has failed. So thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and thanks for having a great conversation around this. And thanks to REDODO for responding and giving me yet another thing that their engineers wanted me to try. And I did, to no avail. So I will keep you guys informed. I know a lot of you are running REDODO batteries, so we're going to get an answer here one way or the other. And again, you'll be the first to know what happens. Aloha, everybody. Yeah, that battery's dead in the water, no doubt.